Welcome to the series Wisecracks by Dr. Gerald Mann. Dr. Mann is the senior pastor at the Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas. Let's join Dr. Mann for Wisecracks.
I've tried to make it a habit for the last 35 years to read the book of Proverbs at least once a quarter. I think there is more practical knowledge in Proverbs than almost anywhere else. It gives you real, meaty, down-to-earth, practical ways to live your life, whether you're a businessman, a housewife, a young person, whatever. And I've never preached from the Proverbs, and I'm going to do a series. I don't know how long it will go. The series is entitled Wisecracks. To me, wisecracks are little tiny windows or cracks into God's wisdom. And when the Bible speaks of wisdom, it's not talking about book smarts or street smarts. Wisdom is book smarts plus street smarts plus reverence for God. Those put together bring about what the Bible calls wisdom. Today we're going to look at some gems of wisdom about how to withstand peer pressure, the temptation to sacrifice who we are for what we ought to be. And I'm going to read from the first chapter of Proverbs, verses 7 through 19. It says, "Wise people revere God's opinion of them, but fools disregard what he thinks. So, heed the learning of your elders and do what they say. Their instruction will beautify your character just as jewelry beautifies your body. And when your peers entice you to do wrong, don't give in. They'll say things like, 'Come on, let's take what we want from the honest people, then we'll get rich and share our loot like a family.' Lose these losers. They are driven by the urge to get everything now. They can't wait. They can't even pause. They can't see the consequences of what they do either. You know, even a bird will avoid a trap if he sees it being set. But these people don't even know that they are setting a trap for themselves. They do not know that greed always claims the life of the greedy." How to withstand peer pressure. You know, for the last 3 Januaries, the first week of the new year, I've been going to the White House for the White House breakfast, and there are about 100 ministers and religious leaders from all over the country, and we're invited. And I went the first week of this January, and when you get there, you go through security, and then they give you your packet. And in your packet, you have your table assignment of where you're going to be seated at the breakfast. There are 10 tables with 10 people at each table. Well, this year when I got my packet, I looked and I was at table number 9. And I said, I'm never coming again. I mean, it's just the same routine. You walk through a line, you shake hands with the president, you exchange pleasantries, they take your picture, you go into the room, you sit down at your assigned table, you eat your breakfast, he gets up and floats some trial balloons on his issues that he's going to be talking about in the coming weeks and months. And then he asks for comments, and the same preachers always hog all the time and make the same comments. Then you burp, and then you go home. And so I just said, I'm at table number 9, and I'm way back at the back of the bus again. This is my last trip. To my utter surprise, when I found table number 9, I found out it was the table. I was sitting at the table with the President of the United States. So I thought, maybe I'll come back. I sat down. The President came in. We all got up and applauded. He sat down. And I wasn't there 3 minutes before I realized that the other 8 people at the table knew the President a whole lot better than I did. They spoke in half phrases and half words, and they would say, that thing we've been talking about, we need to visit some more about that. And before it was over, I realized that I was the only stranger at the table. In the middle of the breakfast, the President said, in a moment when I speak, I'm going to float a trial balloon. I have an idea about letting charitable organizations and churches help the government distribute welfare. What do you think, Gerald? And I wrinkled my brow, and then I, like I was really thinking, and I even sort of did a Richard Nixon. I said, well, Mr. President, I haven't thought about that, but it sounds like a creative idea. Don't know a lot about it, but by golly, I think it's a great idea. I think it'll work, Mr. President. I really congratulate you on that. Well, the truth is, I thought his idea stunk. I left there and I started wondering, why didn't you tell the president what you really thought? That's what he wanted to hear. Why didn't you tell him? Here's the reason. Although I was at table number 9, I was not in at table number 9. And my overwhelming desire was to be in at table number 9. So I lied. And I remembered something C.S. Lewis said. He said, in many men's lives, for certain periods of time, and in some men's lives for all periods of time, we are overwhelmed by the desire to be inside the local ring and terrified of being outside the local ring. Now, I was reading the Heaven's Gate material that was left on the internet when those people graduated, committed suicide, checked out, whatever they did. And it was interesting to read all of their material. I read two or three, dozen pages. And the same control mechanism was in that cult that is in all cults. And that is the overwhelming fear of breaking ranks with the group. You had to dress alike, do your hair alike, even erase your gender by wearing the right kind of clothes. Everybody was afraid of breaking ranks with the local ring, with being excluded, being outside. When they left the premises, they had to have a partner go with them, even down to suicide and castration. And gentlemen, I don't know which one horrifies me the most, but the desire to be in, whether you're a cult or whether you're a Baptist preacher at the White House, everybody in this room, whether you're young, old, or somewhere in between, is faced every day with the overwhelming desire to be included, to sacrifice who we really are in ourselves just to be accepted. How do we fight that? That wonderful old proverb is filled with practical suggestions. It makes 2 wisecracks, gives us 2 windows of wisdom. First, it says, if you want to resist peer pressure, heed history. That's 2 H's. I do that so maybe you'll remember it after lunch. H-H, heed history. What does that mean? It says, heed the learning of your elders and pay attention to what they say. Don't ignore what they say. Now, I like the wording. It says nothing about doing what your elders do. It says learn from them and listen to what they say. A couple came to see me not long ago. They were flower children in the 60s. They're in their 4th marriage. They got kids from all 3 marriages previous. They were flower children who rode around in a bus and went to Woodstock and slept in musical beds and smoked whatever there was to smoke, and they've been into drugs and all of that. And now they have an 18-year-old who is rebelling. He's promiscuous sexually. He's into drugs. He's got a ponytail and earrings everywhere earrings will go and purple hair and all that sort of stuff. And they said every time we started to talk to him about being responsible, he says, you are talking to me about being responsible? I've seen the family photo albums. I know what you did in the 60s. He said, what are we going to say to this kid? I said, well, just say what I say to my kids. Don't do what I do or what I did. Don't do what I did. Do what I learned from what I did. What does that mean? Well, talk to them about the fact that when you take drugs for long periods of time, you have arrested behavior, and there are big gaps in your development that never take place. So you'll end up 40 years old still thinking like you're 20 and not being able to use any of the wisdom of 20 years. Talk to them about how difficult it is to make a long-term commitment in any relationship when you've had so many relationships that were so cheap and without commitment. Talk to them about that. Don't do what I do. Don't do what I did. Do what I learned. When I was 42 years old, I awakened one day to the fact that for 20 years in the ministry, 22 years, all I had done was conform to what somebody else said a good minister ought to be and ought to look like and ought to do. You're not going to believe this, I used to be a real fundamentalist, Bible-breathing, fire-eating, hell and fire brimstone preacher. That's true. I had white shoes and white pants and a red coat and even had my hair done up in a little coif. That's true. And I went out on the sawdust trail, and I knew how to get people down the aisle. And every time somebody invented a new method, I would, if they'd have had knocking people over, this was before Catherine Kuhlman, I'd have been knocking them over too. or trying anyway. And then I rebelled against that, and I became the classic rebel. I did everything rebels are supposed to do. I afflicted the comfortable at every chance I got, and I brooked fights, on every street corner. And I criticized everybody I could. And then I came to this very liberal church, which was supposed to have free ideas, and I found out that they were free with everything but the other person's opinion. And I sat out there on that cliff after Gary Bradley and his partner offered us this beautiful site to build a church. And I sat on that cliff, and a question came into my mind. I think it came from God. And the question was, Gerald, have you ever heard, read, or talked to anybody who had a meaningful life by doing what you've been doing for the last 22 years? And I obviously answered the question, no. Heed history. There are lessons from history. History isn't just recording the past. It's recording lessons, and if you break them, they'll break you. How do you resist peer pressure? Heed the lessons of history. The second gem of wisdom from that proverb is 2 L's. Heed history. The second one is learn losers. Gives 3 classic traits of losers. Now, a loser is somebody who sacrifices his character for convenience. That's what a loser is. And there are 3 ways to peg a loser. The first one is a loser always requires sick company. A loser cannot stand to be alone. If misery loves company, losers love other losers. Losers band together. It says in that proverb text that I read, they will come to you and say, come, join us, join us, join us. We'll use dishonest means to rob honest people, and then we'll become an honest family, and we'll share the loot. Come and join us. Be one of us. They have to have somebody copying what they're doing. I was at one of the malls not long ago, and it was in the afternoon during school hours. And I pulled up, and I saw 3 teenagers, and they looked to be 16 or 17. They were all dressed alike, looked alike, and they were passing a joint around. And there was a youngster, I suppose 13 or 14, younger than they were, and he was watching them. And as they passed it around, do you call that I never did drugs. I drank, but I never swallowed. Anyway, they were puffing on that thing and holding their breath as long as they could, and this youngster was watching them. And when it came his turn, it was obviously that he didn't know how to hold it. So they showed him how to hold it, and he began to try to use it. And it made me so angry, I wanted to go out there and strangle them all, because he thought those older guys were so cool. I mean, you could just see it in his eyes. And just before I jumped out of the truck, I remembered at the age of 13 when I started smoking. And I just couldn't stand to smoke alone. And I went around in all of my classroom trying to get everybody else to smoke, and I finally got one guy to smoke. And when he started smoking, then I felt I was okay. Sick company. That's one of the traits of a loser. Second trait of a loser that's mentioned in that proverb is that they demand instant gratification. It says they want everything right now. It says not only can they not wait, they can't even pause. They have to have everything right now. Years ago, I read a book called Inside the Criminal Mind. It's by 2 researchers and psychiatrists from Washington, and they've had the best record in rehabilitating criminals in our generation. They had 2 real crazy names, Same Now and Yokelson. Who could forget that? Same Now and Yokelson. You ought to read that book. What they say is that our mistake in non-criminal society is that we don't understand how criminals think. And if you're going to help criminals, you need to think like a criminal thinks. They don't think like we do. Their number one thought pattern is the shortcut. Example, they see a woman who's attractive. Instead of going through the rigors of meeting her, wooing her, courting her, winning her affection, they rape her. They see something they want. Instead of getting a job and an education and working for it, they go and rob it. They steal it. And then they go on to say, this kind of immediacy is something that grips all of us in one way or another. And they really get to meddling at that point. Because they say that when we overborrow money we can't pay back, the credit craze, that's a symptom. When we buy every new diet book that comes out. Last year, I read the other day, $16 billion is made each year on new diets. And the writer was saying it all boils down to this. If you burn up more calories than you take in, you'll lose weight. Duh. The shortcut. But we got a new shortcut. You know, I got on something where you ate cabbage and drank something. And anyway, I won't get into that. But it was no shortcut. Immediate gratification. The third trait of a loser in that proverb is that they can't see tomorrow. They have no concept of consequences. It says, it uses a funny story. It says even a bird will avoid a trap if he sees you setting the trap for him. But these people set their own traps, and they don't know that greed always robs the life of the greedy. You could translate that, losers don't use the sense that God gave a bird. That's not what it says, but that's what it means. So, how do we keep from falling into the trap of losing ourselves for the sake of what somebody else wants? How do we resist peer pressure? Two things. We heed history, we learn losers. Now, here's the question that bothers me. Even though we know that, why do we keep giving in? Why did I do what I did at the White House? I mean, I'd read this proverb for years. Why did I do that? And the answer lies in the first verse of the proverb. It says, wise people revere, respect, have reverence for God's opinion of them. Did you hear that? Wise people respect God's opinion of them. Fools disregard what God thinks of them. Wow. Let me illustrate that. There may be somebody here old enough to remember an old actor named Joel McRae. You remember him? There was an old Western movie called Stars in My Crown. You remember that movie? Oh, one or two. It was about a Southern preacher on the frontier in the West. It was, how could he be Southern? He was Southern and went to the West. And his grandson was with him, and the grandson wrote the story. And the drama was set around an old black slave who was given a portion of land when he was set free by his slave owner. And he was given the worst land on the ranch. He was given the thorn scrubs and the swamps. And later they discovered that the land held very, very valuable mineral deposits. And immediately all the business people in town started trying to figure out how to get the land away from the old freed slave. And he didn't want to sell his land. That was where his birth was. That was his symbol of freedom. That's where his family was buried. And so they offered him money and more money and more money, and then they tried to take it away from him by disproving his title. And when none of that worked, they finally announced that on a given night they were going to show up in their hoods with torches, and they were going to burn him out and take his property. And the old preacher, hearing about it, went to be with the black man in his hour of need. And when he got there, the little boy hid under the porch, and they found that the black man was dressed in his only fine suit. He wanted to die with dignity. And the preacher left the black man inside, and he went out on the porch to meet the riders with their torches. And as they rode up in the front yard, he opened his big Bible. And he said, Henry is not going to let you steal his property. Instead, he's going to give it to you. And I have here in this Bible his last will and testament. To John, he bequeaths his fishing pole because he taught John how to fish with that fishing pole. And John is one of the men under the hoods with the torch. To James, he gives his squirrel rifle because James learned to shoot with that squirrel rifle. And James is out there under the hood. And to the banker, he calls his name. He bequeaths his property because you seem to want it so desperately. And the banker's out there under the hood. And one by one, the old preacher reads off the possessions of Henry that he has given away. And one by one, the riders snuff out the torch and ride away until there's only the preacher standing out there by himself in the darkness. And the little boy runs up behind him and looks over at the Bible, and there's nothing there. And he says, Grandfather, what kind of will was that? And he said, it was the will of God, my son. It was the will of God. And then he says to the boy, I had to lie in order to show them who they really are. The only way ultimately that we can resist the temptation to sacrifice who God created is to get in touch with who we are. God's opinion of you. Not your mom's, not your dad's, not your culture's, not your buddies, but if you could know what God thinks of you, then you would know that you didn't have to be like anybody else. God help me and God help you this week to let God tell us who we are.
Thank you for joining us for the series Wisecracks. For information on other audio tapes or books by Dr. Gerald Mann, please call 1-800-388-9500 or write to Gerald Mann Ministries, P.O. Box 842076, Dallas, Texas 75284. You can turn the tape over now for the continuation of this series from Dr. Gerald Mann.